Right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Zoom with the Principal. Welcome to Wednesday morning and this rainy Wednesday morning. I don't know about you guys. I'm getting tired of the rain. Well, I'm getting tired of the rain happening on my commute because I'm getting tired of driving in the rain. So that's not fun. Those of you that don't have a long commute, I am jealous of you that you don't have to deal with this sort of thing.
Traffic's still bad for short commutes.
Yeah, true. But driving down 101 when it is pouring rain and then some
Accident.
bad word person zooms by you driving way too fast for that kind of weather, it's
Yeah.
not great. Okay, anyway, that's not our topic today. Our topic today is talking to your teens about sex and consent. This is a really important topic, and it's not a comfortable topic. So I have a slideshow. As always, if you guys have questions, I probably need to actually share my screen. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat. You can raise your hand. You can, do whatever you would like to do. Let me actually start the presentation. That's not how you start a presentation. There you go. All right, you guys can see the screen, right? Yes, okay. And then, sorry, my dad's calling me right now. Sorry, Dad, you're gonna have to wait 45 minutes. So Ms. Pereira is here with me today, as is Mr. Rosales. So they're gonna chime in, and we'll talk about how we have dealt with this with our own kids. So like I said, this is not the most comfortable conversation to have with your children, or even like today, us having this conversation. It was funny. So both of our social workers weren't available to come today. Ms. Cruz may actually join in at some point. She's in a meeting, but if she's able to, she will join in. But so we were looking for, Ms. Pereira agreed to come, but I talked to Mr. Campbell too, and he's like, oh, I don't want to talk about that. So this is not a, yeah, it's not a popular conversation, but it's really, really important. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to actually talk about like things that you should talk about your kids at different phases in our life. Those of you that like this is your last kid, they're a teen, you don't have small kids anymore. Some of this may be like, it's too late for me for that, but that's okay. Some of you, I know Rupert, you have small children, so some of this may be helpful if you have smaller children, or if you have friends that have smaller children, you can give advice. All of us will probably be grandparents at some point, so we can be those annoying grandparents that give like advice to our kids about how to raise their kids. Like our parents annoy us with that. We can like return the favor someday. So think about that. All right. Okay. Before we get started, let's do a quick poll. How many, and you can put it in the chat or raise your hand or do something. How many of you have already talked to your kids about sex and consent? Anybody? I lost there's my chat. I couldn't find my chat. All right, Virginia has done it. Anybody else? Amy raised her hand. Some of you are doing some thumbs up, some things, not all, no. Okay. I know Rupert says no. I know I have two kids. I have definitely had the sex talk with my daughter, not with my son. And I realized yesterday, I was like, oh, this is a topic. And last year I promised the parents that I was going to have the sex talk with my son. And it's a year later and I didn't do it. Guys, I didn't do it. So it's okay. If you haven't done it, it's okay. So don't worry. So if you have, those of you that have, what age did you start this conversation? I know for my daughter, I actually waited until she started the conversation herself, which was probably a mistake on my part. I probably should have done it first, but she was about 15. Anybody want to put in the chat about what age? Okay, we've got a 14.
I want to admit that I have always kind of brought that up from very young. I was very
Okay.
open with breastfeeding my kids.
Okay.
Because I always felt that if the boys were to see me and the natural things, they wouldn't be overly curious.
Yeah.
And I feel that that has worked. So we've been very open. But when it came to sex, I think at like 13, 12, 13, like eighth grade-ish,
Yeah.
because I know that me personally, that's when I became sexually active. And I was with my first husband by the age of 14.
Uh-huh.
So I knew that I had started early on. Why wouldn't my kids think about it? And times have changed so much.
Sure.
So I thought it was really important, and it continues just because I was recently going to San Jose State. So we had to take the sex harassment classes and stuff. So things I would learn in there, I would come back and communicate to the boys and, make sure they understand that no is no
Yeah.
and all that good stuff.
That's awesome. I'm seeing a lot like, like the early, like, talking about puberty and stuff. And I think that's true. Like, I think a lot of us have big puberty talks, probably 9, 10, like around then. But then like having like this talk about actual sex, like that's usually like I'm seeing a lot of teenager stuff. So I think that that's normal. So we've got different options here. We'll skip this. Okay. All right. So
Back
what are
in
we
my
talking
day,
about?
we didn't have sexting either. So that's very different.
Yeah. Well, and so I'm glad you brought that up, Virginia, because when we're talking about sex and talking to your kids about sex, it's not just talking about puberty or the actual acts of sex. These conversations, anatomy, which is pretty much the puberty talk, right? Sexual activity, of course, intimate relationships, contraception, STIs, and being, like understanding what those are. Pregnancy, consent, maybe my chat box so I can see my screen, sorry. Masturbation, pornography. How many of us are talking about masturbation and pornography? Like that's something like I know myself, probably not something that, is quick to talk about, but it's something like we just put up in the chat, like what they're exposed to. This is important stuff to talk about. And also talking about sexual orientation. And, I'm hoping that you guys are creating an atmosphere for your kids that you are accepting and open, and that if they are confused about their sexual orientation, that they feel like they can talk to you about that. And so I think talking about that sort of thing early is something that is important, so that they feel like they can come to you. Okay, so let's talk about types of things to talk about at different age. So under 5 years old, like when they're little kids, obviously they're too young to talk about sex and sexuality. I mean, that would be silly to do that at that age. But that's a great time to talk about body parts and body autonomy. So this is what sorry, moving on my boxes. This is what the experts recommend: to use autonomically correct terms to describe body parts. This helps them identify to you if something's wrong and how to communicate to you. And so what they're talking about that, we tend to use little nicknames for, our like body parts. And so actually using the terms vulva, vagina, penis, and not saying, down there. I'm totally guilty of it. I don't even think we had a term for it. And I'm trying to like think back with my kids when little and what I called it. I think I might have just called it their private parts.
Yeah.
I don't know. Nancy, Rupert, what do you guys? Do you have names when your kids were little?
So this is kind of weird because we speak another language. We might use the term in another language, so that
Oh,
won't be
there you
seen
go.
as, I'll say, vulgar or obscene. But I think we would use privates a lot at home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Pito,
what'd you say, Rupert?
Pito, Pito,
Okay.
or your Witos, Pito Witos.
So the experts say that you should not do that, that you should actually use like the autonomically correct terms. I'm gonna be honest, you guys, and this is us having a very awkward conversation. I am about to turn 50 years old and I don't use the word penis and like normal, like that's not like conversational. That's or vulva or vagina. That's not, I still feel weird about those terms. I don't know why that is. That's maybe my own awkwardness and like my own issues, but I still feel that I have a hard time with that. But this is what the experts say.
We're
So
gonna
if you
have to,
guys are struggling, I'm with you.
you're gonna have to sub in bio, I think. I'm just
I
kidding.
I'm a social studies teacher, not a science teacher. Okay. All right. So when they get a little bit older, depending on their body development, they might start experiencing puberty at this time. So this is a good time to talk about what's appropriate and non-appropriate. Nobody touching their bodies, especially if, especially I think this is probably more typical with girls, but girls who go through puberty early, and they start wearing a bra and things like that, and like classmates like pulling their bra straps and doing things like that's not okay, and teaching them that that's not okay, that nobody should be touching their bodies. Deciding and advocating for what is comfortable, uncomfortable, and making sure that you're like honoring that they like know that they can speak up when something is making them feel uncomfortable. One thing I always think of, and a difference in how I raised my children, my daughter, who's older, I wasn't aware of all of this when my daughter was young. And so did I make her hug her grandparents and, relatives and stuff? Yes, I did. I did not, though, with my son. I was kind of more aware that you should like let kids like, choose for themselves. And so I didn't force the hugging with my son because, but this is something that like to think about with your little kids and making them, give a kiss to a creepy relative that maybe is not what we want to do.
And it is really different because in a lot of cultures, right, it is customary to greet people with I call it the kissy poo. But you're
Yeah.
right, like just growing up in that type of environment, and they're our student, our kids are growing up in this society, and it's very awkward for them to do that at times, it seems.
Yeah, totally. Totally. And I think that, just being aware of it and like talk. And so like what this is talking to your kids about, what's uncomfortable and what's not, and does it make you feel uncomfortable? And I think talking about the culture too, that you like, okay, maybe we live here, but in our culture, this is what's normal. And so with like older relatives, they may expect this because that's what they feel is normal, culturally. And I think that that's an important conversation to have.
But they still don't have to do it.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Talking about masturbation, that it's normal, not shameful, healthy, but it's only done in private, especially with little kids, because little kids may start, touching things because it feels good. And that's not something, having a conversation that, hey, that's okay, but you do that in private and you don't do that out in the public where people can see you. When they get a little bit older, these are your tween years, you're 9 to 12 years old. Definitely to be talking about puberty at this time. If you haven't talked about it before, this is definitely the time to start talking about what to expect during puberty. I think especially talking about, in one conversation I remember having with my daughter about puberty, and we had like a puberty talk because I did it when she was 8. I had this great book it was an American Girl doll book, and which seems crazy, but it was a great puberty book. And so we had that conversation, but when she was, I want to say 11, started having like really like big mood swings, and like, and so talking to her about what your hormones can do, not just to your physical body, but to you mentally, because I think that was something that had been left out of the initial conversation, that like what she was going through and the fact that she would just randomly burst into tears was normal and that was okay. So starting to have open conversations with them about their experiences and telling them what your own experience was when you went through puberty and like what you felt like with going through puberty. And I think this is like something that like even when like they're now in high school and you're talking about like more complex issues and talking about sex, like be willing to have and open up about your own sexual history and like what, you know, you went through. I think that it's super uncomfortable. I'm not gonna lie, my daughter asked me, you know, about when I lost my virginity, and I had to be like, hold on, let me pour a glass of wine. And I had to like, okay, now I'm ready. Because it was super awkward and super uncomfortable. Um, so, but like we were saying, like when they get to high school, that's really when you want to start talking about sex. You want to talk about what it is, and that it's not, I think it's important to talk about that it's not just necessarily penetration, but like all sexual activity is considered sex. I don't think a lot of kids, you know, necessarily get that. And so talking about, you know, yes, there's the like physical act of like sex with penetration, but then there's also a lot of other stuff that goes along with that, that is considered sex. So that's, you know, how it's done, how it can lead to pregnancy. It's actually remarkable what kids really don't know. I would say by the time they get through high school, they've figured it out if nobody's talked to them, you know, and that sort of thing. But, you know, there's a lot of confusion out there. And so really like explaining like what leads to pregnancy, what doesn't lead to pregnancy is important. What safe sex looks like. And so, you know, talking about contraceptions and condoms and things like that. Talking about what consent means. This is really, really important. And talking about, and it kind of goes along with like, you know, having those early conversations about what they feel comfortable with and what they don't feel comfortable with. And talking like, you know, with your boys about, you know, are they sure they have consent, that just because the girl's going along with it, or another boy, I'm sorry, I shouldn't like just assume that it's a heterosexual relationship, that their partner is okay with it, doesn't, they actually need to ask, are you okay with this? Do you want to go on? Do you want to do this? And ask, and like actually getting them to learn that they should actually ask. And so with our girls and our boys, like, let me like, and I don't want to gender, like, if they are in a situation where they feel uncomfortable, and this goes for boys too, where they are like, I don't know if I want to do this, being comfortable with saying no and being like, I want to stop this. I don't feel comfortable with this, and that's okay. And they shouldn't feel bad about that, that's really, you know, important, and they're respecting their body and them and themselves, and that they should need to speak up. I think that having that conversation is one of the most important things that a parent can do, because I see it time and time again where a sexual experience happened between two teenagers, and then one regrets it later and did not want it to happen, but didn't say anything. And so the other partner assumed consent, but the consent wasn't really there. And it happens, I see it way too much. And what we do and the complaints that we get, and they come to us afterwards, and it's really devastating.
Yeah. I wanted to add also that, I mean, kind of going into another topic, but consent cannot be given when under the influence. So if students are drunk or, yeah,
Good
so
point.
that's something, you know, just everyone should be aware, and they should share that with their children as well.
Yeah, good point. Thank you, Nancy. Okay, true or false? A little quiz for you guys. Talking about sex with your child makes them more likely to act on it.
False.
Good job, Elsa. It is false. False. Studies have shown that when parents talk to their children about sexuality, providing accurate information and sharing their values, their children are more likely to delay sexual intercourse and use protection when they do have sex. So, I don't think any of us like are really excited about the idea of our kids running around and having sex when they're 15 years old. But just know, like, if you talk to them, like, you actually probably are encouraging them to delay, and, you know, having and making decisions to have sex when it's right for them, and that it's not something that they would regret later. Because I know for myself, this is just me, I don't really necessarily care and like have like this is when in the point of their life they should have it be having sex. But what I want for my children is I want them to feel good about it, and that when they do have it, it was a decision they made and they feel good about it. I don't want them to ever have to regret something like that.
Just being healthy about it, right?
Exactly. Thank you. Yes. Okay, so teenagers, and this came up in the chat, one of you brought this up. They receive so much information from their friends, from social media, from the lives around them, that if we're not having these conversations with them, they are learning it. So if they're not learning at home, they're learning it out in the world. I promise you, every single one of your teens at some point has been exposed to pornography. I mean, it's just out there. It is so prevalent now on social media and on the internet. Like, it is so accessible that they're exposed to it. And so talking to them and like, you know, oh God, I feel so weird talking to you guys about this. So obviously the sex that is seen on pornography is not real world. That's not like what normal sex is. And so talking to them about what sex is like normally and like, you know, and no judgment. I mean, people have their own likes and dislikes and things. But like that having like, if that's their only exposure, pornography, their only exposure to sex when, you know, they're like 14, 15 years old and that's what they're seeing, then like their expectations of what it's actually going to be is going to be skewed, I think.
Not a healthy outlook, maybe.
Exactly.
No,
Thank you.
maybe, I don't know.
No, Nancy, you're right there with me. We're going tandem. I like it.
Yes.
Okay, so what percentage of people will have sex before 18 years old? What do you guys think? 10 to 15%, 20 to 25%, 40 to 50%, 70 to 80%? Oh, I went too far, so I told you the answer. 15% of teens are sexually active by the age of 15. 42 to 44% will have sex before the age of 18. So you can see like in those high school years, that's a big jump, you know, but still most of them haven't, you know, by the time they graduate from high school, aren't actually sexually active. But having this conversation, because when they go off to college and now they're not with you, that's where I think a lot of, and I don't think we have that data, no, we don't, about when they go off to college. I think that that's when a lot of this will happen. And so talking to them about this, you know, and preparing them, especially, you know, what we're talking about with consent, and especially having that message that if you're under the influence, you can't give consent. That is so important because they're going to go off to college, they'll be exposed, you know, they'll go to parties and things like that, and teaching them that before they leave is really so that they go prepared.
Yeah. That's kind of my chicken way of dealing with it. Like I'll dress up my conversation about, well, when you're away at college, these things might happen. So that's just kind of my like go-to way to handle those conversations. Just because I'm like putting it away, like, oh, it shouldn't be happening now, but here's the information, right? So.
Yeah. So things and ways to talk to your kids about all of this. Ask them questions, you know, have they heard about this? You can totally, I mean, you can do it in a way of gossiping, like, oh, are your friends having sex? And, you know, and just like feel out like what they've been exposed to. I've told parents this before. When my daughter was a teenager, she and I one summer watched Love Island, the reality show together, and obviously there's a lot of sexual relations going on there, but it was a great like way of jumping off point of her and I having conversations about, you know, relationships and what's okay and what's not okay, you know, because we were watching the silly TV show together. Don't push if they're uncomfortable. If they are totally freezing up and like, you know, you don't want to traumatize them, so back off if they're like, oh God, but I always like to use the term planting some seeds. You've planted some seeds, like, they might be uncomfortable then, but then they'll calm down and like, maybe they'll like come back and they'll be, okay. I mean, I know with my son's so awkward, and, like if I brought up, I really thought last night I should just be like, Nathan, do you want to talk about sex? He would lose his mind and like run out of the room. He would feel very uncomfortable. So don't push them, but let them know that you're willing to talk. So remind them that you're there for them, to ask questions if they need help. You can just be like, hey, if you ever want to talk about, sex or anything like that, or you have questions about anything, you can always come to me. It might be uncomfortable, but we'll get through it. Okay, so what to do? Use direct and clear communication, even if it feels uncomfortable. And you can even like start laughing and be like, I feel so uncomfortable right now. This is such an awkward conversation. But then just like plow ahead. I think they would appreciate that you also feel uncomfortable, because I promise they feel uncomfortable. And I think that they would appreciate if you were feeling awkward yourself. Tailor your conversation to your child's age and maturity level. So meet them where they're at. Explain sexual abuse and encourage them to talk to you about anything that makes them feel uncomfortable. You want to be their ally and the person that they can come to. Hopefully, they never, experience anything like sexual abuse, but, bad things happen. And so you want to have you be the safe space that they could go to. Share your own experiences with going through puberty. Talk about safe sex practices. Talk to, if you have boys, actually buy condoms for girls. Like, be like, do you need me to buy you condoms? I will buy you condoms. Like, have that be something that is acceptable. And like, hey, if you're going to have sex, you need to be having safe sex. Offer resources to your child on puberty and sex, such as books, websites, and pamphlets. And when I send out this recording, I have some websites that I'm gonna and some resources that I will link and I will send out that you guys can take a look at. Encourage them to ask you questions and process their reactions to this information. This is probably not just a one-time conversation, but something that we will keep coming back to. So don'ts. This is stuff you should be careful not to. They don't like using slang terms for reproductive body parts. I know, I feel like that's a personal judgment call.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily have a problem with it. Shame children for masturbating or being curious about their bodies. Don't tell them that it's bad. But you could say that's what we do in private. It's okay. But you don't want to shame them. Don't discourage your children from asking questions. Sometimes, especially if they're little, they may ask you a question at a time that's like you're in the middle of Target and they ask you a question very loudly, and that may be like, hey, we'll talk about this when we get home. That's a really great question though, but we're going to talk about that later. So don't be like, don't talk about that. But maybe you can choose the time and place. Don't make up answers. If you are unsure about one of their questions and you don't know the answer, look it up together. Or let them know you don't know and that you'll follow up with them when you have an answer. Because maybe you don't want to look it up together, because if you're looking up stuff about sex, you might find some links that are inappropriate that maybe you don't want to expose your child to. So maybe you say, I'm going to look that up, I'm going to find out and I'll come back to you. So maybe you look it up on your own, depending on the situation or what the question was. Don't be afraid to seek out information or guidance from a healthcare provider, an educator, or other reliable sources. If you guys want to call me up and say, like, how do you think I should do that? I'm here for you. I know Ms. Gunter and Ms. Cruz are here also. You talk to your doctor about this. So there are people here, like you've got people in your corner that can help you out. Okay, so these are the resources. I will send these in the because obviously you guys, that's a lot of words and very long for right now, but I will send that out to you guys for resources. All right, let's go through the chat. Okay, so masturbation, you haven't talked to any advice. I think, this is, depending on how comfortable you feel about that conversation, I think you could just talk about that it's normal. You don't necessarily, I think just like being like, it's normal. And um, that's something that maybe you can like, if it comes up in like a TV show, like as a joke sometimes, or a movie or something like that, you can be like, oh, it's funny that they were joking about that. It's such a normal thing to do, that sort of thing. I think you want to make it like feel like it's okay and not something that they need to be embarrassed about. That's my advice about that. Is just like make it seem like it's a normal thing.
Yeah, it's natural.
Exactly, a natural. We touch elders' feet for blessings, which is great for others. I've taught my child side hug, which minimizes physical contact. I too enjoy a side hug, as opposed to a full-on hug. I've noticed that they're sort of being the odd one if a child has not been in a relationship, kissed, etc. When friends have been all through this and having breakups, this is challenging and sensitive. Don't want them to feel peer pressure. I totally agree with that. I feel like, depending on the child, they may feel like if awkward about that. I think that that's important to talk about though. And that, things happen on their own timeline. And just because it doesn't happen in high school doesn't necessarily mean that it won't happen, that it's never going to happen. I used to like, talk about like high school, like the very small, like pool, like, there's a whole great big world out there, and, what's available and like what's out there now is not the way it's always going to be. I think it's important to talk about though, even if they haven't had any sort of, if your child isn't dating, because they may like they're going to go to college, and then again it's a whole big world. And so a friend of my daughter's in high school she was fairly awkward, did not have any sort of relationships, blossomed though that summer before. I mean, she's a beautiful girl, but she went to college, and boys liked her a lot, and she went a little boy crazy, and like it really became kind of a thing. So you still, even if they're not dating and you're thinking like, it's okay, you still want to have those conversations, because it may happen all of a sudden. And so you don't want to be caught unawares.
Kind of also, I don't, I'm just kind of stuck on I'm trying to think like the teenager where they're like, everybody has boyfriends and girlfriends and whatever. And so I think they see that, but just being that we're at the school every day, there's a lot less couples than there are more couples, I would say.
Yeah,
Like way less
I think
couples.
that's true.
Yeah.
I mean,
So,
sure, there are kids that are in a couple and like they've like been dating for all 4 years, but
yeah.
that's like 2 kids,
Yeah.
as in the entire school.
Yeah.
Virginia, your hand's up.
Yeah, I also wanted to add the importance of body language. That was one conversation that I've had with my son, is body language. Not everybody is as open and understanding and knowledgeable about the topic. So we have to be mindful of that, or I could teach him to be mindful of that towards the other person. They may look uncomfortable, but not know how to express, to say no, or to push away, or like maybe I have to do this or I can't do. So being mindful, if your child has that feeling, to just let them know that, if they feel like maybe the other person looks uncomfortable, not to force it. Another thing that I have addressed with my son is what the opposite sex may go through during that time or the first time, so that he is aware and one can support the other person, or just be aware of what may happen. If you do it for the first time, it's going to hurt. You're going to bleed. Like this, that's all normal. But just looking out, just being more aware of, the things that we really like. I don't know, I'm just different. So I go really into detail. When I
Perspective,
knew my
right?
son was having a relationship, that's when I offered him the condoms. And I said, just make sure. And then you talk about the STDs and all of those things. And then you have all the other, I also do have the conversation of, it is easier for a boy to get blamed for something than a girl, like, and if a girl wants to easily go and say that, you forced yourself on them, that's reality, and I have all of those conversations with them so that they're aware of all of the dangers, and what to look for and how to be responsible and safe.
Yeah, thank you, Virginia. I think that that's really important. I want to touch on, there was a private message to me, and so I want to touch on if you have a child with special needs, and how do you have these conversations? And I think that is where, where we talked about those age, breakdowns, think about like what's appropriate for your child in terms of like age, and and they may be 16 years old, but they're not a typical 16-year-old. You do still need to have these conversations though, because physically they are a 16-year-old. And so desires and what's going to feel good and like that sort of thing, they are going to experience. And so you need to be having conversations about touching themselves, when's appropriate, when's not appropriate. And then also definitely talking about consent. I've heard too many stories of people with special needs getting taken advantage of. And I think that that's really, like, it actually is a very important thing to have a conversation with. Your child's teachers, because they are experts on, this sort of thing. And believe me, they have seen it all. Would actually be really a great resource to help you with those conversations.
Yeah.
So Nancy, you seem like you're about to say something.
Oh no, I was just thinking, like, again, on just the importance of like having those conversations about what's appropriate touching and not appropriate touching, right? Because depending on where the student's intellectual maturity is, like you were saying, so like just kind of always reiterating that, because I have a family member who is very special needs, and I know like that's a fear, like they don't know how to communicate even. So like just the reality of that the child understands like what's okay and not okay all the time, like, that's just where my head was.
Yeah, no, I think that that's a really important point. And yeah, for all our kids, I mean, I think that that's really important. Okay, I feel like we've run through the questions. Any other questions? How are you guys feeling about this? Are you all set to go and have these conversations?
Mm-hmm.
And Virginia's like, yeah, I have them every day. I mean, like, it's no big deal.
He's gonna come over to my house for dinner, I think is what's gonna happen.
Yeah,
I
right.
think it's just, it's kind of what I study as well, but I have two high schoolers, a middle schooler, and an elementary schooler. So I'm at all different levels. Like my 9-year-old, we speak about the no square. So, and him, I'm more open with him for others touching him inappropriately, being safe, not necessarily because I want him to go out and know about this stuff, but because I need him to be aware of what his no square is and how people shouldn't be in that square or touching that square, which is from the chest to the bottom. And just making sure he stays safe, and if he doesn't feel comfortable, to make sure he mentions it to somebody. And then my junior or my middle schooler, I'll start to talk about puberty. And then the high schooler, I have two high schoolers. I have a freshman and a sophomore and a senior. So even the high schoolers, those are different, conversations, because you have a senior who's already there, and then a sophomore who's gonna start being more curious. So even those conversations are different.
Good point.
Yeah. And I like that what you were saying about the nose, like how you deal with it, like with like your younger one with the no square, and just like don't let people touch you. They like, like that's not where people should be touching you. But I think that's also teaching him that he doesn't touch people in that area too, right? And like so it kind of goes both ways. If you're teaching them like people shouldn't be touching you in these areas, without you saying it's okay, then that's also teaching them that they don't go and do that also. And so, Rupert, are you inspired to go have these conversations with your kids?
Well, not the sex and consent. I don't know if I'm there yet or if they're there. Well, obviously they're there already. But I do like what Virginia just said. I do the since they were little until now, I always ask them, and I'm gonna be just honest on how I say it. I say, did anybody touch your butt? Like I literally ask them that. I drop them off at the mall, pick them up. Anybody touch your butt? At my brother's house or their uncles or their aunts, and they come home from like spending the night. Anybody touch your butt is the first thing I when they walk in, and then like after a while, it kind of gets to the point where they started to realize why I asked that, and then it's kind of like, oh, nobody touched my butt. I had fun, and then I don't know if that I guess that kind of works for us because that's a way of like of me uncomfortably asking, but you got to ask, right? Or that's the um not a concern, but it's at least a fear that we have as parents
Yeah.
of like where they're going. And it's usually when you see stuff like that, it's usually like, and I know this is like different topics and than sex and consent, but it's all still like related to like their no square or
Mhm.
and what they're doing. And that's kind of how I ask. I have one that has girlfriends, but he never leaves the house. So it's a little different. And then I have one who is oblivious. He doesn't he tells me he's attracted to girls, but he's not there yet in like talking to them in that way. But I do have one that I think I do. I'm probably a little bit late on the conversation, but I don't think it's past due.
Mm.
Well, I don't think it's ever too late to have the conversation. So get going on that.
And in fairness, this is just one side. I don't know if my wife has.
Well, and
She
so I think
very
that
well
that's
could have.
actually that's an important point, Rupert. I think it's, if you have a partner and you're not raising your kids on your own, having a conversation, have you talked to our kids about this?
Yeah, right.
And and so what are we going to say? And like kind of having that, two front and you're together on that. I think that also is important. And I said that it's never too late. I'm going to share with my own personal experience. I'm going to, I think sometimes it is too late because I know my mom never had this conversation with me and she never talked to me about it until I was already sexually active. And what she said to me was, well, make sure you keep your legs crossed. That was not a good thing to say. It actually gave me a lot of bad feelings about sex because I was already sexually active and she made me then feel bad about it. She didn't realize I was sexually active, but I felt this guilt of like, oh my gosh, my mom is going to disapprove of like what I've been doing. And that, you know, I'm not gonna lie, that was actually like really like harmful in my relationship with my mother in my teenage years. And so I'm coming from a place of like, don't have my experience, have a better experience with your children, and encourage them to talk to you, and be open with them and be supportive, because yeah, you want to have a good relationship with your kids. I think that's really important. Okay, thank you guys for this conversation and for being willing to be awkward with me this morning. I appreciate it. I appreciate all of you. Next week, our topic is we're going to talk about what's normal with teenage behavior and what's not normal. So we'll talk about, we always wonder like, God, my teenagers, because they're their own people and they do really weird teenager things. And so we're going to talk about like what's normal and then what's something that maybe you need to be a little bit more concerned about. Okay. But have a great week. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. You guys are saying that this was helpful to you. That makes me very happy. I try to do topics that you guys are going to find helpful. I will say that probably in March, I'm going to do a topic on online sexual harassment and online sexual violence that you guys are going to like. I want to teach parents about. So that will be coming up later in the semester. Okay. All right. Thank you guys. All right. Bye.